Chapter 17 of Afloat on the Ohio, an historical pilgrimage of 1,000 miles in a skiff from Redstone to Cairo. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Andrea Strano. Afloat on the Ohio by Reuben Thwaites. Chapter 17. Storied Louisville, Red Indians and White, A Night on Sand Island, New Albany, Riverside Hermits, the river falling, a deserted village, an ideal camp. Sand Island, Tuesday, May 29th. Our Louisville host is the best living authority on the annals of his town. It was a delight and an inspiration to go with him today, the rounds of historic places. Much that was to me heretofore foggy in Louisville's story was made clear upon becoming familiar with the setting. The contention is made that LaSalle was here at the Falls of the Ohio during the closing months of 1669, but it was over a century later, under British domination, before a settlement was thought of. Dr. John Connolly entertained a scheme for founding a town at the Falls, but Lord Dunmore's War, 1774, and the Revolution quickly following, combined to put an end to it, so that when George Rogers Clark arrived on the scene with his little band of Virginian volunteers, May 1778, en route to capture the Northwest for the state of Virginia, he found naught but a savage-haunted wilderness. His log fort on Corn Island in the midst of the rapids served as the base of military operations and was the nucleus of American settlement, although later the inhabitants moved to the mainland and founded Louisville. The falls at Louisville are the only considerable obstruction to Ohio River navigation. At an average stage, the descent is but 27 feet in 2.5 miles. In high flood, the rapids degenerate into merely swift water without danger to descending craft. At ordinary height, it was the custom of pioneer boatmen in descending to lighten their craft of at least a third of the cargo, and thus pass them down to the foot of the north side portage, Clarksville, Indiana, which is 3/4 of a mile in length. Going up, lightened boats were towed against the stream. With the advent of larger craft, a canal with locks became necessary, the Louisville and Portland Canal of today, which is operated by the general government. The action of the water, hastened by the destruction of trees whose roots originally bound the loose soil, has greatly worn the islands in the rapids. Little is now left of historic Corn Island, and that little is, at low water, being blasted and ground into cement by mill hard by on the main shore. Today, with a flood of nearly 20 feet above the normal stage of the season, not much of the island is visible. Clumps of willows and sycamores, swayed by the rushing current, give a general idea of the contour. Goose Island, although much smaller than in Clark's day, is a considerable tract of wooded land with a rock foundation. Clark was once its owner, his home being opposite the Indiana shore, where he had a fine view of the river, the rapids, and the several islands. As for Clarksville, somewhat lower down, and back from the river a half mile, it is now but a cluster of dwellings on the outskirts of New Albany, a manufacturing town which is rapidly absorbing all the neighboring territory. Feeling obliged to make an early start, we concluded to pass the night just below the canal on Sand Island, lying between New Albany and Louisville's noisy manufacturing suburb, Portland. An historic spot is this insular home of ours. At the Treaty of Fort Charlotte, Cornstalk told Lord Dunmore, the legend familiar among Ohio River savages, that here, in ages past, occurred the last great battle between the White and the Red Indians. It is one of the puzzles of the antiquarians, this tradition that White Indians once lived on the land, but were swept away by the Reds. Cornstalk had used it to spur his followers to mighty deeds. It was a precedent which Pontiac dwelt upon when organizing his conspiracy, and King Philip is said to have been inspired by it. But this is no place to discuss the genesis of the tale. Suffice it that on Sand Island have been discovered great quantities of ancient remains. No doubt in its day it was an overfilled burying ground. Noises far different from the clash of savage arms are in the air tonight. Far above our heads, a great iron bridge crosses the Ohio, some of its piers resting on the island, a busy combination thoroughfare for steam and electric railways, for pedestrians and for vehicles, plying between New Albany and Portland. The whir of the trolley, the scream and rumble of locomotives, the rattle of wagons, and just above the island head, the burly roar of steamboats signaling the locks. These are the sounds which are prevalent. Through all this hubbub, electric lamps are flashing, and just now a steamer searchlight swept our island shore, lingering for a moment upon the little camp, doubtless while the pilot satisfied his curiosity. Let us hope that savage warriors never o' nights walk the earth above their graves, for such scenes as this might well cause those whose bones lie here to doubt their senses. Near Brandenburg, Kentucky, Wednesday, 30th. We stopped at New Albany, Indiana, 603 miles, this morning, to stock the larder and to forward our shore clothes by express to Cairo. It is a neat and busy manufacturing town with an excellent public market. A gala aspect was prevalent, for it is Memorial Day. The shops and principal buildings were gay with bunting, and men in Grand Army uniforms stood in knots at the street corners. The broad, fertile plain on both sides of the river, upon which Louisville and New Albany are the principal towns, extends for 8 or 9 miles below the rapids. The first hills to approach the stream are those in Indiana. Salt River, some 10 or 12 rods wide, enters from the south 21 miles below New Albany, between uninteresting high clay banks, with a lazy-looking little village of West Point, Kentucky, occupying a small rise of ground just below the mouth. The Kentucky hills come close to the bank, a mile or two farther down, and then the familiar characteristics of the reaches above Louisville are resumed. Hills and bottoms, sparsely settled with ragged farmsteads, regularly alternating. At 5 o'clock we put in at a rocky ledge on the Indiana side, a mile and a half above Brandenburg. Behind us rises a precipitous hill, tree-clad to the summit. The doctor found up there a new phlox and a pretty pink stone crop to add to our herbarium, while here, as elsewhere, the bignonia grows profusely in every crevice of the rock. At dark, 2 ragged and ill-smelling young shanty-boat men, who are moored hard by, came up to see us and by our campfire to whittle chips and drone about hard times. But at last we tired of their idle gossip, which had in it no element of the picturesque, and got rid of them by hinting our desire to turn in. The towns were few today and small. Brandenburg, with 800 souls, was the largest, a sleepy, ill-paved, shambling place with apparently nobody engaged in any serious calling. Its chief distinction is an architectural monstrosity which we were told is the courthouse. The little white hamlet of New Amsterdam, Indiana, 650 miles, looked trim and bright in the midst of a green thicket. Richardson's Landing, Kentucky, is a disheveled row of old deserted houses, once used by lime burners, with a great barge wrecked upon the beach. At the small, characterless Indiana village of Leavenworth, 658 miles, I sought a traveling photographer of whom I had been told at Brandenburg. My quest was for a darkroom where I might recharge my exhausted Kodak, but the man of plates had packed up his tent and moved on. I would no doubt find him in Alton, Indiana, 15 miles lower down. We have had stately eroded hills and broad fertile bottoms hemming us in all day, and marvelous oxbows in the erratic stream. The hillsides are heavily wooded, sometimes the slopes coming straight down to the stony beach without intervening terrace. Where there are such terraces, they are narrow and rocky, and the homes of shantymen, but upon the bottoms are whitewashed dwellings of frame or log, tenanted by a better class, who sometimes have goodly orchards and extensive corn cribs. The villages are generally in the deep-cut notches of the hills, where the interior can be conveniently reached by wagon road. A country rumpled like this, they say, for 10 or 12 miles back, and then stretching off into level plains of fertility. Now and then a deserted cabin on the terraces, windowless and gaunt, tells the story of some cracker family that malaria had killed off, or that has pulled up stakes and gone to seek a better land. At Leavenworth, the river, which has been flowing northwest for 30 miles, takes a sudden sweep to the southwest, and thenceforward we have a rapid current. However, we need still to ply our blades, for there is a stiff headwind with an eager nip in it, to escape which we seek the lee as often as may be, and bask in the undisturbed sunlight. Right glad we were at lunchtime to find a sheltered nook amidst a heap of boulders on the Kentucky shore, and to sit on the sun-warmed sand and drink hot tea by the side of a campfire, rejoicing in the kindness of Providence. There are a few houseboats since leaving Louisville. Today we have seen but 3 or 4, one of them merrily going upstream under full sail. Islands, too, are few, the upper and lower Blue River, a pretty pair, being the first we have met since Sunday. The water is falling, it now being 3 or 4 feet below the stage of a few days since, as can readily be seen from the broad dado of mud left on the leaves of willows and sycamores, while the drift, recently an ever-present feature of the current, is rapidly lodging in the branches of the willows and piling up against the sandspits, and scrawling snags and bobbing sawyers are catching on the bars and being held for the next fresh. There is little life along shore in these lower waters. There are 2 lines of ever-widening willowed beach of rock and sand or mud. Above them, perpendicular walls of clay which edge either rocky terraces backed by grand sweeps of convoluted hills, sometimes wooded to the top and sometimes eroded into palisades, or wide-stretching bottoms given over to small farms or maybe dense tangles of forest. In the midst of this world of shade nestle the whitewashed cabins of the small tillers, but though they swarm with children, it is not often that the inhabitants appear by the riverside. We catch a glimpse of them while landing on our petty errands. We now and then see a houseboater at his nets, and in the villages a few lackadaisical folk are lounging by the wharf. But as a rule, in these closing days of our pilgrimage, we glide through what is almost a solitude. The imagination has not to go far afield to rehabilitate the river as it appeared to the earliest voyagers. Late in the afternoon, as usual wishing water and milk, we put ashore in Indiana, where a rustic landing indicated a settlement of some sort, although our view was confined to a pretty wooded bank and an unpainted warehouse at the top of the path. It was a fertile bottom, a half-mile wide, and stretching a mile or 2 along the river. 3 neat houses, one of them of logs, constituted the village, and all about were grain fields rippled into waves by the northwest breeze. The first house, a 1/4 of a mile inland, I reached by a country roadway. It proved to be the post office of Point Sandy. Chickens clucked around me, a spaniel came fawning for attention, a tethered cow mooed plaintively, but no human being was visible. At last I discovered a penciled notice pinned to the horse block, to the effect that the postmaster had gone into Alton, 5 miles distant, for the day, and should William Askins call in his absence, the said Askins was to remember that he promised to call yesterday but never came, and now would he be kind enough to come without fail tomorrow before sundown, or the postmaster would be obliged to write that letter they had spoken about. It was quite evident that Askins had not called, for he surely would not have left that mysterious notice sticking there for all Point Sandy to read and gossip over. It is to be hoped that there will be no bloodshed over this affair. Across the way in Kentucky there would be no doubt as to the outcome. I looked at Boss and wondered whether in Indiana it were felony to milk another man's cow in his absence, with no ginger jar at hand into which to drop a compensatory dime. Then I saw that she was dry and concluded that to attempt it might be thought a violation of ethics. The postmaster's well, too, proved to be a cistern, pardon the Hibernicism, and so I went farther. The other frame house also turned out to be deserted, but evidently only for the day, for the lilac bushes in the front yard were hung with men's flannel shirts drying in the sun. A buck goat came bleating toward me with many a flourish of his horns, from which it was plain to be seen why the family wash was not spread upon the grass. From here I followed a narrow path through a wheat field, the grain up to my shoulders toward the log dwelling. A mangy little cur disputed my right to knock at the door, but, flourishing my 2 tin pails at him, he flew yelping to take refuge in the hen coop. To my summons at the portal there came no response, save the mewing of the cat within. It was clear that the people of Point Sandy were not at home today. I would have retreated to the boat, but, chancing to glance up at the overhanging hills which edged in the bottom, saw 2 men sitting on a boulder in front of a rude log hut on the brink of a cliff, curiously watching my movements on the plain. Thankful now that the postmaster's cow had gone dry, and that these observant mountaineers had not had an opportunity to misinterpret my conduct, I at once hurried toward the hill, hopeful that at the top some bovine might be housed, whose product could lawfully be acquired. But after a long and laborious climb, over shifting stones and ragged ledges, I was met with the discouraging information that the only cow in these parts was Hawkins' cow, and Hawkins was the postmaster. Down yon, where you were reading the notices on the house block. Neither had they any water up there on the cliff top. Don't use very much, stranger. And what we do, we done get at Smithfield's in the log house down yon. Now reckon their cisterns done gone dry anyhow. But what is the matter down there? I asked of the old man. They were father and son, this lounging pair who thus loftily sat in judgment on the little world at their feet. Why are all the folks away from home? He looked surprised and took a fresh chew while cogitating on my alarming ignorance of Point Sandy affairs. Why, ain't you heard? I thought every feller on the river knew that here. Why, old Hawkins, his wife's brother's buried in Elton today, and the neighbors done gwine to the funeral. Where your shanty boat been beached that ye ain't heerd that year? As the sun neared the horizon, we tried other places below with no better success, and 2 miles above Alton, Indiana, 673 miles, struck camp at sundown, without milk for our coffee, for water being obliged to settle on boil the roily element which bears us onward through the lengthening days. Were there no hardships, this would be no pilgrimage worthy of the name. We are out philosophically to take the world as it is. He who is not content to do so had best not stir from home. But our camping place tonight is ideal. We are upon a narrow, grassy ledge. Below us the sloping beach is strewn with jagged rocks. Behind us rises steeply a grand hillside forest, in which lie, mantled with moss and lichens, and deep buried in undergrowth, boulders as large as a cracker's hut. Romantic glens abound, and a little run comes noisily down a ravine hard by. It is a witching back door, filled with surprises at every turn. Beeches, elms, maples, lindens, pawpaws, tulip trees, here attain a monster growth, with grapevines, their fruit now set, hanging in great festoons from the branches. And all about are the flowers which thrive best in shady solitudes, wild licorice, a small green briar, and, although not yet in bloom, the sessile trillium. We are thoroughly isolated. A half-mile above us faintly gleams a government beacon, and we noticed on landing that 3/4 of a mile below is a small cabin flanking the hill. Naught disturbs our quiet, save the calls of the birds at roosting time, and now and then the hoarse bellow of a passing packet, with its legacy of boisterous wake. End of chapter 17. Recording by Andrea Strano.